In the Odyssey, when Odysseus encounters the Cyclops, it is one of his most adventurous adventures. Odysseus and his crew, they're heading home, but they need to stop. They're low on food and stuff. They find this island. They don't know who lives there. Are these nice people? Are they bad people? So he and his crew, he takes a few of his men and he goes onto the island. They don't think that anyone's there. But then they find this cave and there's food. So they eat the food. But they're curious who the food belongs to. And then this giant guy comes back to the cave. He's of the race of the Cyclops, these big one-eyed assholes. And he has a herd of sheep. And when he comes home, he's kind of angry that there are these little humans in his cave. His name's Polyphemus. What he does is he pushes this boulder in front of the cave so that they can't escape. And this is presumably how he keeps the sheep from escaping when he's asleep at night, because he's a sheep herder. And then before he goes to bed, though, he eats two of Odysseus' men. Odysseus, of course, is not very happy, plus he's trapped. He knows he wants to kill this Cyclops guy, but even while he's asleep, he can't do it because then he won't be able to get out of the cave. It will be like locking himself in because that big boulder is too big for him and his men to move. But Odysseus is smart. He's full of cunning. So what happens after the Cyclops awakes in the morning? First he eats a few more of Odysseus' men, but then he takes his sheep out and he pushes the boulder back in front of the cave. But Odysseus plans for when he returns. So what happens is that the Cyclops comes home again the next day. And Odysseus has some wine that they brought from the ship, and he offers it to the Cyclops to get him drunk. He wants to be buddies with Odysseus now because he's all drunk. And he asks Odysseus, "What's your name, dude?" And Odysseus answers, Utis. Or usually this is translated as nobody or no man. But in Greek it is Utis, which is sort of a way of signing anonymous works. Polyphemus doesn't know that. He just thinks it's a name. As Polyphemus sleeps, Odysseus and his men, they sharpen a wooden stake and then they drive it into his one eye. And this really makes the Cyclops mad. He screams like and yells for help from the other Cyclops, and they're like, "Who messed with you, man?" And he's like, Udis, which means nobody. So they're like, "Nobody? What are you whining about?" And they don't come to help him. In the morning, Polyphemus moves the boulder and he's going to take his sheep out. But he thinks the men are still inside. He thinks he still has them trapped because he's blind. He doesn't know. But they're smart. They're hiding underneath the sheep. They're tied or hanging on somehow. It's hard for me to believe this part because I can't imagine a sheep just like carrying a person underneath their belly. Can sheep really move normally with the weight of a human strapped to their belly? I don't know. I did find this video of kids riding sheep. Apparently it's some kind of a, quote unquote sport called mutton busting. But I didn't find any adults doing this. I just don't think sheep are really built to carry that kind of weight. But perhaps these are special giant sheep. Like the Cyclops are bigger, maybe the sheeps are bigger as well. So Odysseus and the undevoured segment of his crew, they escape. They get back to their ship. And just as they start to sail away, they're home free. There's no way the Cyclops, Polyphemus, can really know they're there because he's blind now. But this is something similar to the sirens. Odysseus, he just has to scratch that itch. He's just kind of curious. He wants to know and experience everything. So Polyphemus is blind. He should just be quiet, but no, he shouts out. He says, "Hey, my name's Odysseus, and I'm the one who messed up your eye. Ha ha ha." Polyphemus, natural, is pissed. He throws some rocks, some giant boulders at the ship, or, from the voice, from the direction of the voice. But he does not hit them, fortunately for Odysseus. But this is kind of risky and unnecessary. But anyways, Polyphemus happens to be the son of Poseidon, the god of the sea, and they're obviously sailing on the sea. So this was not necessarily the best move from Odysseus if he wants to get home. This episode is quite different. We have a totally new narrator. I hesitate to call it an interior monologue, though. This sounds more like the way it's told, like some story you would hear in a bar, which is appropriate because that is the location of this episode, in a bar. We don't know a lot about the narrator himself. We don't know his name, for example. We just refer to him as I. But we know that he is a man and that he's kind of a crotchety fellow. He will be very critical and tearing people apart in his mind. He's very critical even of his so-called friends, but especially of people like Leopold Bloom, who he does not like at all. This narrator, the first word of his story, his narration is I, I with the letter I, but then the last word of that sentence is I, like the eye. And I think Joyce is calling attention to the fact that we're not going to be dealing with monsters in the sense of physical monsters like most things that are transferred from the Odyssey. This is more a general analog of who this character is. He's only able to see his perspective, his very narrow perspective. In the opening sentence, he's going to be complaining about nearly getting his eye poked out, for that matter, by this chimney sweep who's passing by. You know the chimney sweeps, the guys that clean chimneys. I was just passing the time of day with old Troy of the DMP at the corner of Arbor Hill there, and be damned, but a bloody sweep came along and he near drove his gear into my eye. DMP is Dublin Metropolitan Police. Troy, this guy, I don't know who he is, but his name, Old Troy, certainly brings to mind the Odyssey. The Trojan War was fought in Troy. Aside from the narration of this guy, we're also going to get some intrusions similar but also different from those in Wandering Rocks. These intrusions are going to be less in space. We're not going to be cutting to a different location. Instead, we're going to be intruding with different narrative voices. I've heard that there are 32 or 33. I've heard different numbers, but there are a lot of intrusions that suddenly the narrator seems like a totally different person. He speaks with different styles of English, all kinds of styles. Some will be in the style of kind of medieval romances, some in the style of the Bible, some in the style of sports journalism, you name it. I'm not going to cover what they all are. Look in the annotations if you want, but they are very varied. And when he does this, it's like putting up a lens between you as you read and the events that are going on, and it's not always clear what is happening in some of these instances. Even the dialogue is suspect. You can not necessarily trust what you're hearing or seeing, but it also brings attention to the fact that all narration is in some sense doing this. It is putting emphasis on some things and de-emphasizing or ignoring other things. The shifts in style can be very jarring. They'll all of a sudden be in a different voice, and they can be very funny too when you shift back and forth. Something you may find frustrating on your initial read of this episode is these long lists of people or things that Joyce is talking about, and usually by the time you finish the list you will have completely forgotten what he was talking about. Let me give you an example. From his girdle hung a row of sea stones, which jangled at every movement of his portentous frame, and on these were graven with rude yet striking art the tribal images of many Irish heroes and heroines of antiquity. Cuchulainn, Conn of 100 battles, Niall of 9 hostages, Brian of Kincora, the Audrey Malachi, Art McMurrogh, Shane O'Neill, Father John Murphy, Owen Rowe, Patrick Sarsfield, Red Hugh O'Donnell, Red Jim McDermott, Sogarth Eogan O'Growney, make it stop, Michael Dwyer, Francie Higgins, Henry Joy McCracken. Usually this method of writing lists like this is connected with the technique that we see in the schemas for this episode, which is the technique is called gigantism, this really bloated, overdone style of putting everything in the sack or whatever that Joyce is talking about. And supposedly Joyce did not come up with this, that it was already found in literature before, in Rabelais. I tried reading Gargantua and Pantagruel once, and I could not really get into it. So I don't know. Has anyone read that book? Is it worth reading? I have come to enjoy these lists. I did not initially, but there's something about the names, what Joyce does with them. I just like relax into them. Some of the names you'll know and you can picture them. Some of the names you will not know, and some of the names will obviously be made up or amalgamations of two or more names by Joyce. But I just think of it as like, I don't know, at some point you just start to drift into it and you just see all these different characters and people, and he mixes fiction and quote unquote real people in a way that you just start to see it as like this tapestry of lives, and I enjoy it. The people that he puts in these lists, sometimes they seem relevant and connected, sometimes they seem like great people, sometimes very insignificant characters, but they are all living on the page in Joyce's imagination, in our imagination, as little or as much as we know about them. And there's some kind of, I don't know, this binary reduction of qualities that he reduces them to just a name, but there's more to all of us, and it's kind of like in a cemetery, all you see is the names, but there's lives behind all those stories. Also, I think that this is maybe unrelated, but it kind of reminds me of SEO, search engine optimization on a web page in the description or wherever. A lot of times you'll see text that is kind of like this. It just feels very padded. The man that broke the bank at Monte Carlo. The man in the Gap. The woman who didn't. Benjamin Franklin. Napoleon Bonaparte. John L. Sullivan. Cleopatra. Savornin Delish. Julius Caesar. Paracelsus.